Chair, now I recognize the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Seligman, your testimony describes that state action case law, and I'll try and boil it down to its simplest terms, that it comes down to the distinction between convince and coerce. And you state that because there was no overt threats to the platforms that the government is in the clear. And I want to be clear, I reject that premise and agree significantly more with Mr. Sauer. But for the sake of argument, let's consider that each individual instance only constitutes attempts to convince platforms by the administration. We still have to view this in its totality. There was an unprecedented level of continuous engagement between the administration and social media companies to address not only categories of speech, but specific individuals, specific content, and specific viewpoints. The sheer quantity has a quality all of its own. The administration performed this unprecedented level of continuous engagement at several levels: the FBI, the CDC, Department of Homeland Security, essentially every single alphabet soup agency, the White House. And that's not even taking into account the State Department funding a nonprofit whose goal was to censor such radical media as the Federalist, Reason, and the New York Post. In one instance, the White House staffer Rob Flaherty sent this exact message to Google. This is a concern that is shared at the highest level, and I mean the highest levels of the White House. He's talking about the President of the United States, and this is coming from an administration that has supported and advanced several policies directly targeting the business models of social media companies: antitrust enforcement, Section 230, encryption, and the list goes on and on. And regardless of which government agency is pressuring these social media companies on any particular issue, they were all being received by the same content moderation teams at those social media companies. The administration isn't going to say, do this or we will shut you down. To be quite honest, that's not how government coercion is carried out. They are never going to directly threaten anyone. But the message is clear from a continuous request: play ball or else. The end result is harming Americans' First Amendment right to speak and also to receive information. Understanding that Mr. Seligman, understanding that content-based restrictions are unconstitutional, are you not at all concerned that the administration's continuous actions have chilled Americans' free speech rights?
I don't think that the administration's actions constitute a First Amendment violation. As you noted, I don't think there were any overt threats, and I don't think there were any covert threats as well. And the best indication that we have of that is that social media platforms could and did disagree with the suggestions that were offered by governmental officials, and they made decisions that conflicted with those recommendations without consequence, repeatedly.
Well, without consequences, they got a lot of emails back and forth. Mr. Sauer, we all understand that if federal law enforcement wants to search the trunk of your car, you need a warrant. And the federal government can't get around that warrant by using a Capitol security guard to open that trunk and then look what's in it. And one of the biggest things that we've been continuing to talk about in this context is the third-party doctrine. If the DOJ can't search my car without a warrant, they can't use a security guard to search my car. But this administration, even though they can't directly censor First Amendment viewpoint discrimination, is trying to use social media companies to carry out their task. How do you view that moving forward?
That is a grave threat to liberty. It directly undermines the First Amendment, and your statements are supported by overwhelming evidence in the record.
And the answer about the third-party doctrine, which we have carried out in different things, and we're dealing with it now, just as simply new, and we continue to move forward. What recommendation would you have for us as Congress to start dealing with this issue?
I believe that this subcommittee should take a very close look and scrutinize the various forms of First Amendment violations we see in this case. Again, not just coercion, but also joint participation in significant entwinement. For example, when you have federal and state officials working hand in glove with nonprofits like the Stanford Internet Observatory, which are also tightly connected to social media platforms to engage in mass surveillance, to engage in the censorship of, we're talking about millions and millions of social media posts, systemic First Amendment violations. That needs to be carefully scrutinized.
And then just with the little time I have left, I know it came up earlier with objectionable. Provided that speech is lawful, content-based discrimination by the U.S. government is a First Amendment violation.
Correct.
So the fact that that speech is objectionable, again, provided that it's constitutionally protected, it's irrelevant to when you're dealing with government discrimination.
That's exactly right. Under the First Amendment, government officials don't get to decide what is objectionable or what is true and false. We get to decide that.
And it absolutely has to be that way. Otherwise, who polices the policers?
Absolutely right. This is the heart of the First Amendment.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.